Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today in these tumultuous times, but we're going to get through them. And you know what? Let's get things going. I want to talk about a couple of things today. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about the Democrats. They are up in arms about the Senate minority leader compromising with the Republicans and getting a GOP budget across the line that the president's going to sign that's going to get a lot of people fired. There will be cuts to all kinds of programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But first, let's talk about something stunning that happened: the expulsion of the South African ambassador to the United States just a few days ago. He is persona non grata. How did that happen? Is this a reaction to Elon Musk, who's been pushing against South Africa the restoration of land to Black South Africans, lands that were removed from them as apartheid really came into its fullest flowering? But there's a lot more, too. Is it Israel? I mean, let's talk about so much of this. And as we get into it with the former head of TransAfrica, indeed, he's now with Standing Up for Democracy, Bill Fletcher. We also have waiting in the wings, attorney Mark Fancher from the National Conference of Black Lawyers, brilliant thought leader in our community. I want you to meet me on Blue Sky at santitajackson.bsky.social, santitajackson.bsky.social. Everyone, please join me on the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. So many of you, hundreds, maybe like 1,000 of you, I have a limit in terms of a number of people I can take on my landing page, as they call it. So I had to open up what they call a fan page. That's where I'm active, everybody. Please go to Santita Jackson and Friends so that we can become friends there. Please do that. Please do that there right away. And of course, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, which is where I am now. Everybody, please like and share, like and share, like and share. You help us with the algorithm when you do that. And of course, the Santita at Santita J. I'm still on X. Yes, I will. I'm still there. So let's get to it. What happened? Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the South African ambassador, Ibrahim Rasool, is no longer welcome here in the United States. He's persona non grata. He is racist. He is polarizing. He is so many things. Now, he did, for his portion, the ambassador said, look, I think that MAGA is a reaction to white fears about becoming the minority. Simple enough. But it seems like it didn't take much. It didn't take much for our government to want to expel South Africa, for our government to want to make South Africans pay for the nerve to take the most powerful country in the world, among them and their closest ally, to the ICC. Many people said, okay, what's going to be the blowback? Well, maybe this is part of it. And now you've got Elon Musk, an Afrikaner, someone who grew up in apartheid South Africa, who is closer to the president, at least as an outsider looking in, than even the vice president. Probably the most influential man in America today, someone who's publicly at least, the wealthiest man on the planet, really basically through a lot of American military contracts. Having said all of that, he's an Afrikaner who's trying to open the door for Afrikaners to come to the United States. We're not welcoming brown people or black people, but we want the Afrikaners to come here. Bill Fletcher, help me to understand what happened. Persona non grata, an ambassador. What does that mean? What happened here?
So thank you for having me on the program first. The expulsion of a foreign diplomat is not at all unusual. This happens actually quite frequently. What's unusual is that the pretext for this is absurd. That the ambassador Rasool had critical comments about the MAGA movement And on that basis, they declared him to be persona non grata. And this is quite interesting given the kinds of comments that the Trump administration has had about the South African government and about South Africa. We have to understand that what's going on here is multi-layered. So on the one hand, the Trump administration has, as you implied, been very resentful of South Africa for taking this side of the Palestinian people in opposition to the Israeli genocide. So that's one factor. Another factor, which I think can't be overstated, is that South Africa represents for MAGA, and certainly for Trump and Musk, a dystopia, a racial dystopia. And they are utilizing South Africa and trying to hold up South Africa as an example to white people in the United States of what happens if the black folks run wild. And that this too could happen in the United States. Now, in order to make this fear threatful, they simply have to misstate what's going on in South Africa. So the whole idea that there is discrimination against white South Africans is absurd. When you look at the white South Africans are about 7% of the population, control at least half of the land, if not more. Their major control in finance and industry. There is no evidence that would support any of these claims. Yet for Trump and certainly for Musk, the fear of a black majority is what they want to instill among white Americans. Now, many of us for years were talking about roughly the period of around 2050, when in the United States, there is slated to be no longer a majority white population. And so many people have looked at this as opening up great possibilities. The problem for MAGA is that this opens up horror. And this can't be overstated. This is horror because this country was founded as a white republic. The MAGA forces wish to reaffirm this notion of a white republic. And so this is the context in which the expulsion took place.
So he made this statement, and you rightly point out that diplomats being expelled from a country, well, that does happen. That does happen. It happens a lot. But there's so many layers to South Africa. One couldn't help but wonder when they had the temerity to take Israel to the ICC, to the World Criminal Court. And I mean, they went with all of the evidence. And many people, legal scholars, have said an incredible amount of evidence. And they have been unrelenting in their pursuit of justice for the Palestinians, that there would be some blowback. You know, of course, we can't help but remember when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, still a terrorist, even a terrorist as president of the United States, according to the United States, when he was questioned by Ted Koppel about his support of the Palestinians. Now, mind you, this is more than 30 years ago. And he said, I went to the West. We went to the United States. Even though Britain and the United States got him arrested in the first place, he said, look, we wanted to work with you. You said no. Cuba and the Palestinians, not only did they come to our assistance, they ran to help us. And so I'm not going to turn my backs on them now that I've been released. They are my friends. One cannot help but think, and you have so much experience in this area, that there would be some kind of blowback. Is this?
Oh, absolutely.
Looking at?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's compounded by the vindictiveness of Trump, his constant search for revenge against those he feels have crossed him. And so this isn't just crossing him, but crossing that which he believes in. So that's exactly what we're seeing. the stand of the South Africans on this. And it's really interesting because South Africa has been a fairly reliable economic partner for the United States. There is the South African government, I would argue, has not done enough to reclaim the land for the majority population. There was no particular reason other than the search for revenge that has emerged here. And we see it across the board. Now, the other part of this, which I think we have to really raise, is what will the rest of the continent of Africa do? You know, are they going to let South Africa dangle out there as a victim of this nonsense? Or will the continent take a stand? And this is a critical matter, and it's a critical test, I would argue, for the African Union. And the African Union, I think, has been failing on a number of these tests. Just as they failed on the issue of Western Sahara, they have been failing when the continent is under assault in the way that it currently is. Right now, the countries of Africa need to stand together and insist that they will not accept South Africa or any other African country treated in this way.
What is happening with the African Union? Number one, for many people in the audience who do not know who they are, and why they would consider allowing Israel to be an observer, because that almost happened.
Right. Well, there's a couple of answers here. So what's been happening in the African Union is that Israel and Morocco, separately and probably together, have been lobbying various countries that are member states of the AU to try to get them to reverse their position on Western Sahara, which is the position of the AU, which is that there is a government in exile of the Sahrawi people, but also to open their doors to Israel. Now, there's actually a history here that goes back to the 1950s and 1960s, when the Israeli governments tried to present themselves as anti-colonial governments. And they approached various African countries to build ties, and claiming that they too, that is Israel, should be perceived as having been a victim of colonialism, and that it would be in alignment with the former colonies in Africa and Asia. This didn't really work very well, but it was an argument that was made during that time. And Golda Meir was one of the people, the former prime minister of Israel, who made that argument. It declined over time, and in its place, what was interesting is that Israel built very strong ties with apartheid South Africa, including in assisting in the production of weapons of mass destruction. So they proved themselves not to be a friend of the former colonial world. But now they're back. And they're back just like the Moroccans, bearing gifts and attempting to, in my mind, corrupt various African countries and win them over to their side. And both countries have been relatively successful in playing to the worst sides of some of the leaderships of countries in the continent.
So we're talking with Bill Fletcher, the former president of Trans-Africa. Yes, that Trans-Africa, indeed, our leading lobbying group for Africa in the United States, but really uniting Africans on the continent and the diaspora. They've done such brilliant work. And of course, we think of Randall Robinson today with so much love and appreciation for having given his life to the struggle, and his brother Max Robinson, who was the first Black man to be a national anchor, network anchor in the history of the United States. What a magnificent family the Robinsons are. When we see a lot of the meddling of the continent, because that's really what you just described,
Mm-hmm.
is that, do you feel that, do you believe then, given that and what is happening now, because there's so much that is, so many pieces that are being moved around the chessboard, Does Africa have the wherewithal to stand strong and firmly behind South Africa? Or are they standing alone?
This is a very tough question, Santita. Very tough because there are various powers that are meddling in Africa. The United States, of course, we've just been discussing. France has a long history. Russia is now getting involved. And they realize the wealth of the continent. And they are using different means to extract that wealth and to grab it from its peoples. Within the continent, there is no collective agreement outside of resolutions about how to unite the continent as a whole. The African Union was supposed to be a step forward from the Organization of African Unity and a step towards the development of a closer and interpenetration within the continent. And its results have been very uneven. It has been very unsuccessful in developing a coherent continental economic policy. It has not been successful in promoting genuine democracy. We've seen a whole rash of coups over the years, and the AU is largely unable to stop that. There needs to be some rethinking within the AU. And certainly when you have countries like Israel and Morocco that are playing a really diabolical role of interfering and trying to corrupt various countries, it becomes difficult to develop a coherent continental policy. And that's leaving aside to other differences, historical differences that have existed for a very, very long time. I have my fingers crossed. I'm not a pessimist, but I'm very realistic about the situation.
What is Morocco's role, though? I mean, because they are African, they're North African.
They are.
But what are they doing?
Well, they have a very close relationship with Israel, for one, and goes back to the 1960s, when it was close collaboration between their intelligence agencies and the Israelis. But the Moroccans have a certain view of Northwest Africa, which is to say that they believe that Northwest Africa should be part of Greater Morocco. So they laid claim to western parts of Algeria, to the Western Sahara, which was colonized by Spain, to Mauritania, to the northern parts of Mali. And they claim that all of that really should have been theirs. And their claims have been shot down. The International Court of Justice, for instance, shot down their claim around Western Sahara decades ago. But they nevertheless make that claim. And they have cultivated strong relationships, not only in Africa, but also in the United States. They have a major lobbying operation here, and they've cultivated ties, I hate to say it, with some key African-American opinion makers and leaders over time, including sponsoring trips, various delegations to Morocco. And it's been a very corrupting influence, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, because they are welcoming African Americans there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There, some people are actually living there and here.
That's right. So, as long as you don't talk about Western Sahara, as long as you don't challenge the monarchy, there's a place for you. The Moroccans are part of the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords were created by the first Trump administration as a way of strangling the Palestinians. And the Moroccans adopted that. When Biden took over, and after Trump had recognized the Moroccan annexation of Western Sahara, it had been our hope, the hope of many of us, that the Biden administration would renounce and denounce that recognition, but it didn't. And part of the reason it didn't appears to be that they were very afraid that the Moroccans would abandon the Abraham Accords, which the Biden administration, decided to adopt, following from Trump. And so the Biden administration was prepared to tolerate the continued occupation of Western Sahara and not take on the Moroccans against something that's internationally recognized as illegal. Now, countries like South Africa and Nigeria and several others have regularly denounced the Moroccans around this and have taken a very, very strong stand. That may be another factor that goes into Trump's antipathy towards South Africa, because the South African government is determined to advance its own foreign policy.
Bill Fletcher, what's next for South Africa then? I mean, does the expulsion of this ambassador mean that we no longer have the diplomatic relations?
Oh, no.
What does that mean?
It means that South Africa has to send another ambassador, and so what happens is there's this formality where an individual who's nominated to be an ambassador shows up on the doorstep of a country and presents their credentials. And when the credentials are accepted, then they're accepted as the ambassador. So that's what will happen next. Mm-hmm. But what the deeper thing that needs to happen is that those of us in the United States that object to this, we need to make our voices known to Marco Rubio, who impersonates a Secretary of State. And we need to make our views known to the Congressional Black Caucus and to others to speak up. I'm getting tired of watching these constant insults taking place and the failure, the lethargy in response, this failure to speak up in opposition to these kinds of insults. We need to speak up. When South Africa is being insulted, we're being insulted. And it's time for all of our political leaders and so-called influencers to rise up together and say, this shall not pass.
Well, so much has been splintered. The Black Caucus, certainly that yes. I knew as a child. Only my brothers now, I have a second brother who's a member of the Black Caucus. And he said, there are more than 60 of us now. He said, but did you know that only 11 of us represent majority Black districts? I said, I knew it had changed. I didn't realize, Bill Fletcher and Attorney Mark Fancher, that it had changed that much, which means that Black political consensus has been diluted. You know, but, I'm not making excuses. I'm saying, no,
it's true.
We had the Ron Dellums, we had the John Conyers, we had the Shirley Chisholms. I mean, we could look straight across the board, and you could look at the Black Caucus 40 years ago and say, this is Black thought in the Congress. Now, it's not the case.
No, that's correct. But it's not, I don't think it's because of the dilution demographically. I think it's much more that the politics within the caucus have changed dramatically.
Because even the Black Caucus weekend feels very different.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's just not the same thing. And so that's why I'm trying to, but even so, if they're going to call themselves the Congressional Black Caucus, something needs to be said, because South Africa is under siege.
Correct.
And if South Africa is under siege, Africa is under siege, and Black people in the United States and in the diaspora are under siege, and Blacks in the diaspora and in South Africa and on the continent are depending upon Black people in America to come through, because that's what we've been doing.
That's right.
So what are the next steps as I bring in Attorney Mark Fancher? Because I'd love for you all to have some interplay before you go, Mr. Fletcher, because what do we do? Because I brought this up, and so many people are like, oh yeah, that happened. And they kind of brushed it off. I said, this is big to me, for them to call the South African ambassador persona non grata.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I said, wait a minute. We've had a lot of people who've done a lot of things that are very offensive. I've never heard, rarely have I heard an ambassador be disparaged in this way? Bill Fletcher.
Well, let me make this my final comment. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to sign off. But I would say that this is, in fact, part and parcel of a politics and a practice of an administration that feels quite comfortable insulting everybody and anybody, but takes umbrage when they themselves are attacked. And so I think that what we've seen here should not at all be surprising. But I just want to end by saying that, yes, folks, this is why we've got to speak up. That there's no room for complacency. There's no room for sitting back. There's no room for shaking our hands. There's no room for simply texting, tweeting, putting on Facebook, Instagram, or whatever our complaints. We need to make our complaints felt in the political realm. And we need to make it clear to this administration that, no, we're not going to accept this kind of treatment of us, of South Africans, of Sararis, of whoever. It's not going to be acceptable. And until we are willing to do that, until we're willing to speak up when there's this spread of this attack on so-called DEI, it will continue, and in fact, it will get worse.
Bill Fletcher, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Blessings to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Attorney Mark Fancher, what say you? I mean, what was your first reaction when you heard that Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool had been expelled, persona non grata? What was your reaction?
Well, at this point, with the mad flurry of activity coming out of the White House in the past weeks, I don't know that I was too fazed by it at all. But I think that, I agree with all that Brother Fletcher said about what caused it and that type of thing. But I think there's something else that's going on here. And if you look at this within a legal context, you have to understand a little bit about international law. In a domestic situation, if we're here in the United States, and any one of us as an individual breaks the law, commits a crime, then either they call the prosecutor or the police or somebody comes and addresses that issue. They may arrest us, they may charge us, they may prosecute us, they may sentence us to a fine or prison term or whatever it may be, and even a civil wrong can be dealt with by way of civil litigation. On the international level, you're not usually able to call someone to come and to take a bad actor into custody and to prosecute them in the same kind of a way that you can, at least not with the same efficiency as when you're on the domestic level. The birth of the International Criminal Court was thought by many, including myself, to be an adjustment to that situation, where you would have a criminal court that operated on a global basis and was able to take people into custody and prosecute them and do all of those kinds of things when they were committing very, very serious crimes against humanity and genocide and things like that. But even predating the International Criminal Court was the International Court of Justice, which is a wing of the United Nations. And that's where South Africa is now with respect to Gaza. I think that played a huge role in what has transpired within the last 24 hours.
Why?
And that's because the value of a ruling from the International Court of Justice is that not so much that anything immediate is going to be done by that court, but what it does is it gives license to those who want to do something to take some sort of direct action to do it. So in other words, right now, when Israel goes into Gaza and they engage in a course of genocide, when they wipe out large numbers of people, when challenged on it, All that they have to do is to say that we're defending ourselves. All that they have to do is to say that we're reacting and responding to the attacks by Hamas. All that they have to do is to say that we're engaging in targeted strikes, that we're not, you don't believe your lying eyes. We're not killing children. We're not bombing hospitals. We're not doing all of those things. They can say that with impunity. There's not much that anybody can do or say about that. But if, as is the case, South Africa goes to the International Court of Justice, they make their case, and the ICJ comes back with a ruling that says, yes, in fact, Israel is engaged in an ongoing process of genocide, then that changes everything. Because then it makes it possible for neighboring Arab states. It makes it possible for revolutionary to progressive governments in other parts of the world to approach and to say that we have a legal basis for taking direct action against the state of Israel. They can do that through a number of means. They can do it through economic embargoes. They can do it through a number of steps which, on a cultural, social, economic basis and level, isolate Israel in a way that they have not been isolated in the past. They transform it into a pariah state in the eyes of the world in a way that they have not been in the past. They make the claims by Israel itself and by its defenders, like the United States, that it is a force and a place that guarantees democracy and civilization for that part of the world. All of that rings hollow because now it's measured against a ruling by the World Court that they're engaged in genocide. And if you want to take it to the ultimate extreme, it, under some circumstances, might justify military intervention in a way that right now would not be justified under law. So what South Africa has done is truly threatening to the Zionist state, to Western imperialism, because this simple act of taking them to the World Court poses the potential for now the world having license to make Israel the pariah state that it should be. And while I don't know that all of that is part of Trump, the individual's calculation, I think his individual calculation and thoughts are more in line with what Bill Fletcher was explaining earlier. But I do think that there are forces in and around the administration that do understand the implications of what South Africa is doing and really are on board with the idea of trying to discredit South Africa as much as they can, proactively, to fire a preemptive strike so that at least they can, in the eyes of the world, present them as being a not credible voice, even when they go to the World Court.
We're talking with attorney Mark Fancher about the expulsion of the South African ambassador from the United States. I think what was striking to me, in addition to this political context in which South Africa is really, they're looming large, Mark Fancher. I mean, they are striking a blow against the biggest imperial force in the world today. And they're doing it, and they've done it without backing down. They're also, I'm wondering where this places them now. I mean, because you got Elon Musk, who has an incredible amount of influence in the United States today. He's trying to open a door, certainly in the United States, to Afrikaners. Where do you see that going? I mean, because he is also becoming increasingly unpopular in the United States. The president is not known for keeping people who cast an unfavorable light upon him, which he's beginning to do. And we're not accustomed to him keeping people like that around. Where do you see this push to bring the Afrikaners here? And many of them are already here. Very quietly, they've settled in the United States. Mr. Fletcher, had written an article as he was talking about Robert O'Brien, the former NSC, the National Security Advisor to in the first Trump presidency. This is an American who went to college in South Africa in the 80s, Mark. Who went to the University of Pretoria in the 80s? By the 80s, South Africa was a pariah state. I mean, Charlize Theron. I mean, I'm not saying that she supported apartheid, but she grew up in it. I mean, very quietly, they have been settling in the United States. They have been doing that. So, I mean, what is the read? Whether Elon Musk is there or not, it seems that parenthetically, we have extended the arm of friendship, the hand of friendship, and we've opened a door to South Africans, to Afrikaners. Let me be very specific about that.
Yeah, and I do think that this whole recent obsession with South Africa has Elon Musk written all over it. I don't think that Donald Trump on his own would necessarily have zeroed in on South Africa. I mean, I think that when you process the world through Donald Trump's lens, I think when he looks at Africa, he just sees one big land blob with the big word Negroes written on it, and that's about as much as he knows about the continent.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
It's not even they're not even countries. It's just Africa.
Yeah, it's just a big landmass. But I think that people I think Elon Musk is very typical of Afrikaners in South Africa, and he is probably thinking strategically about the future of these white settlers and how they can continue to not only preserve what they have, but how they can begin to expand it. For generations, they have really controlled and dominated the extraordinary wealth, natural wealth, mineral wealth that's found in South Africa. And while it has not really been threatened in a significant way by a majority Black government, they do want to think several steps ahead to that point when somehow there is an ability to seize control of Africa's wealth. And one day that will happen. And if you can expand your base beyond just that geographic region, and in the southern part of Africa, and you can really get a firm foothold, if not a stranglehold, on the U.S. government and all of its military machinery and its economic might and the empire that it possesses, then that puts you in a much better position of preserving your little base of power that you've had in South Africa for so long. And they feel quite justified in doing this. I mean, you have to understand that these are descendants of Dutch settlers who came down and stole the territory at gunpoint and through the use of terror, and imposed a system of apartheid, extreme racial segregation and oppression for many generations, and then become indignant that someone would dare suggest that they don't own this, that this is not theirs.
And that you must return our land to us.
Yes.
While we're here, and we're the majority, we're here.
Yeah, they stole it fair and square.
Yeah.
And how dare anybody suggest that it should be returned to the indigenous population? So I think that's part of his concern. And if we want to give him credit for really thinking strategically, then he understands what many people within the empire have understood for a very long time. Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first president of Ghana, was beyond brilliant. Mm-hmm. I mean, he anticipated a lot of these kinds of things back in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. And when his country became...
And of course, wait a minute, he's a product of an HBCU.
Absolutely.
I think
Lincoln.
That's right.
Yeah. And in fact, not only that, but many of the ideas that I'm about to explain, he picked up when he was here in the US
That's right.
under the tutelage of people who were thinking about Pan Africanism. But when he led Ghana to independence in the late 1950s, the first thing that he said when he took the podium was that our independence is meaningless unless the entire African continent is liberated and
Mhm.
unified. He said, because we're a small little country, and unless we are joined with an entire continent and we stand as one, then it will be easy to pick off any one of our little countries. That we
Mhm.
must come together as one big landmass. And he didn't make this analogy, but it's one that I frequently make. And that is that if we'll pick any state, let's say if the state of Indiana decided that they wanted to secede from the United States and they wanted to become the Democratic Republic of Indiana, they would be laughed off of the world scene. They don't have an economy that anybody appreciates or is
Mhm.
dependent upon. They don't have any kind of diplomatic influence globally. They certainly don't have the military capacity to defend themselves if ever they needed to do that. Uh, they don't have anything. I mean, they're just a little tiny little no-name country that nobody respects and they can be booted around at any point that anybody chooses to do that. But you join Indiana along with 49 other states in North America, and now all of a sudden nobody's laughing at them anymore. And that was Kwame Nkrumah's point about the 54 states in Africa, that as long as they're divided in 54 little independent countries, then it's always going to be easy to target one of them and to do whatever you want to do with them. But standing strong, the United States of Africa is an unbeatable force. And so if you look at South Africa, where it dares to stand up against the big bully,
Mhm.
where it dares to go up against Zionism and against the Western empires and to challenge them in a real way, then they are vulnerable for
Well,
precisely the reasons that Nkrumah identified back in the 1950s. And this has always been understood by Africa's enemies, and they have waged relentless attacks against anybody who espouses the idea of African unity.
well,
And
that's
so
Gaddafi. Yes.
Africa, he's a perfect example. Muammar Gaddafi wanted to make tangible and real moves toward unifying Africa, first with a unified currency and through a number of other means.
He was
But
almost there. I mean, he was like, he was on the verge. I don't think that people really understand, Mark, how close he was to really unifying the continent, and he really has been the strongest black leader that Africa has known in many respects since Nkrumah.
he certainly had,
He was certainly, I would say, I'm not going to put him past Nyerere and Kaunda and all of these other great leaders. But there was something that he was doing, but maybe it's because of the wealth of Libya and what he was doing with that wealth internally. And, and creating a floor beneath which no human being in Libya could fall, really tearing down the color barriers and all of that. He did so much, Mark.
well, he dared to do it. I think that many other African leaders didn't dare to try it
Mhm.
because they knew that what happened to Gaddafi would happen to them. And back in 1963, when they first formed the Organization of African Unity, Nkrumah was excited. He was thrilled beyond measure that they were
Mhm.
going to come together and do this. But what the enemies of Africa understood was that they had to stop this in its tracks. And so they came in and they co opted it, they transformed it into a body, a collection of neo colonial states that would continue to do the bidding and the will of the Western powers. And those who were leading countries during that period dared not really look at the possibility of unifying Africa economically, politically, militarily, and otherwise. And the call for Pan Africanism, for unifying Africa, has been constant at the grassroots level. It has always been a demand, and the people in leadership have always heard it. They've always known it was there. It was reaching fever pitch at the point when they decided that they were going to disband the Organization of African Unity and instead create the African Union. But that too was part of a game. They knew that they had to do something to show that they were hearing the demand for Pan-Africanism. And so they created the African Union as a ruse. It was a charade, a sham. They put this together with no intent of doing anything other than what the OAU had done as its predecessor. And so business continued as usual. Gaddafi's great crime in the eyes of the empire was that he went in and assumed leadership of the African Union and tried to actually make it live up to what it professed to be. And that's when they went in there and they got him. So the question really is, how do you break through that? And I think that we're being shown the way by Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali in the Sahel region. Within the last couple of years, those three countries have banded together as part of an alliance, and they have stared down France, they've stared down the United States, even when those countries were making the most credible threats of coming in and intervening militarily. And those three countries stood up and they said, you touch Niger, you're going to have to deal with Mali, and you're going to have to deal with Burkina Faso. We may be small, but we stand together, and we're all going to go down fighting. And the West backed off. They didn't expect to see that. That took them totally by surprise. And once they did that, then it fired the imagination of African people, the length and breadth of the continent. You know, that example of what the unity of three states can do. I think
three states together, right?
That's right.
It's important because they have been fascinating to watch, in particular the leader of Burkina Faso, because they have said, you know, because he seems like he's the big brother of the three, and they have said, France, get out. Whatever you have in your hands, you can take that with you, but no more. You may not have any more of our resources. All business alliances will be renegotiated, but before we even do that, you must get out of here. You must get out of here. And I see, you know, many people don't realize, and I read this, an Irish Republican wrote this, who owns the world. And Irish Republicans are very interesting because the Irish Republicans are not the Irish who we know in the United States. The Irish in the United States become white. They become privileged. There, they are fighting the power, and they let you know it. They side with all oppressed peoples. And you know, Attorney Fancher, when you go to Northern Ireland, you have a home there because they are not playing. They are clear that they are fighting the crown. And they don't play. I mean, some of the most inspiring freedom fighters that I've ever met in my life are from Northern Ireland. They take me out. I was at a conference, I must say, Mark Fancher, and this man was talking, it was in Britain. And by the time he was finished, I leaned over to my mother. I said, that's my husband. And my mother said, I thought you'd get you. My sister started nudging me. I said, oh, he has carried me away. He is serious about this fight. I love him. And he's a dear friend today. That having been said, I want to know just where South Africa goes from here, because I see the President Ramaphosa, I see him saying, wait a minute, we will not be bullied here. I see different officials in his government saying, you know what, I realize that you all are spying on us after us taking this case to the ICC. That's okay. You've been threatening my children. That's okay. We're not playing with you. South Africa, and then the younger guns they're not the diplomats. Let's put it that way. So help me to see where we're going from here. The last 3 or 4 minutes belong to you, because even though this young man has been expelled, Ibrahim Rasool, he has united people around the world. you see Muslims coming together because he's one of our Muslim brothers. You see other people looking at South Africa who have not backed down.
Yeah.
They're very serious about freedom and freedom fighting, Mark Fancher.
Yeah, well, that's where we go with it. I think that it helps us to see clearly who our enemies are and who our friends are. You
Mhm.
talked about Ireland.
Mhm.
Ireland was among the very first to sign on to the International Court of Justice uh, uh, claim that was asserted by
Mhm.
South Africa. Uh,
Northern Ireland.
that's right.
That's right. It's important.
And um, I think that for those of us in the United States, whether we're in Compton or Chicago or Detroit or Atlanta or wherever it is, for those of us who sit and shrug our shoulders and say, well, we don't care, you have to understand and look at examples like this to understand that the enemies of South Africa are the same our enemies as well.
Hmm.
Uh, these enemies are the enemies of humanity generally. And we can't continue to hope that the empire, that Zionists, that others are going to have our best interests at heart, that somehow we have to find out how we can become a part of what they are and what they're building. We have to pull out away from it and we have to join with real people, people of goodwill around the world. And that's where our allegiance needs to be. So when we see South Africa stepping out there and trying to protect, people who are being murdered in mass in Gaza, as a gesture of true internationalism and international solidarity, we got to have their back.
Hmm.
Because in the same way that South Africa, with its tiny self, relatively speaking, is able to effectively strike a blow on behalf of oppressed Palestinians, they have the capacity to do that for any of us, including those of us who are oppressed in the United States.
Hmm.
And knowing their willingness to do that, we need to have a reciprocal kind of a relationship. When they need our
Hmm.
help, we need to be there for them. And throughout the more countries in Africa that stand with them, the stronger Africa is, and the more capacity it has to provide support, solidarity, and the backing that oppressed people throughout the world need in order to advance their struggles. And so that's how we have to see ourselves. We have to see ourselves as part of a global community
Hmm.
of people who are victims of the forces of oppression and exploitation, all of us coming together across national boundaries in order to fight a shared enemy. And once we do that, then we will have the true victory that I think so many people who are oppressed have been longing for years and years and years and years.
Amen to that. And we have to look at all of our allies. We've been talking about Northern Ireland. So among our strongest allies, in fact, the green in the Black Liberation flag is from Ireland. They have been our brothers and sisters in the struggle. So think about that, everybody. And our love and prayers with Ambassador Rasul. Uh, I'm I'm glad that he is fighting. He hasn't gone down. He has gone over. And I appreciate that. I really, really do. And I appreciate you, Attorney Mark Fancher. And I dedicate the show today to one of the first two freedom fighters I've ever known, my mother, born on St. Patrick's Day. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes. Happy birthday, mother. Happy birthday, mom. Love you, love you, love you. Happy birthday to all of the people who were born on this day, and certainly on St. Patrick's Day. May the spirit of Northern Ireland in particular, let it remain strong and let it push forth. Sending you so much love today, Attorney Mark Fancher and Bill Fletcher. I'm Santita Jackson. Let's switch over to the next hour. What do you think about the compromise that Senator Chuck Schumer made? Many people are saying that AOC needs to primary him and maybe someone else. Now, that would be 4 years away, but some people are saying we should not wait because by compromising on the GOP budget, um, the cuts that we might have had an opportunity to stop while they're going to be here. But Senator Schumer said if we let him shut down the government, he would have shut down everything. What do you think? Come on over to the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Back here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Back in just a moment.